The rain hammered against the kitchen window like accusations I wasn't ready to face. Sarah Chen stood at the granite counter, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago, watching water streak down the glass in patterns that reminded her of tears. The house felt too large around her. All those rooms David had insisted they needed, all that space that somehow made her feel smaller with each passing day. It was Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary moment that splits a life into before and after. David had rushed out 20 minutes earlier, his usual symphony of hurried footsteps, jangling keys, and muttered curses about traffic. In his wake, he'd left the scent of his cologne lingering in the air and something else, something that made Sarah's chest tighten with a feeling she couldn't yet name. The second phone lay on the marble counter like an accusation. She'd found it wedged between the couch cushions while searching for the remote, its black screen reflecting nothing but her own startled face. At first, she'd assumed it was David's work phone, though she couldn't remember him mentioning getting a new one. The device felt heavier than her own iPhone, substantial in a way that suggested importance, secrets, weight. Sarah had always prided herself on being the kind of wife who didn't snoop. In 7 years of marriage, she'd never gone through David's belongings, never checked his browser history, never questioned the late nights at the office that had become more frequent in recent months. Trust, she'd believed, was the foundation of love. But holding that phone, feeling its smooth surface warm under her palm, something fundamental shifted inside her. The house around her held its breath. Their golden retriever, Max, padded into the kitchen and looked at her with those knowing brown eyes that always seemed to understand more than they should. He'd been acting strange lately, too, following David around with an almost anxious energy, as if sensing the undercurrents that Sarah had been too afraid to acknowledge. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Should I?" Max whined softly, a sound that somehow felt like permission. The phone required a passcode. Sarah stared at the numerical keypad, her thumb hovering over the screen. She tried David's birthday. Nothing. Their anniversary? Still nothing. On impulse, she tried Max's birthday, the date they brought him home as a puppy, and felt her heart skip when the screen unlocked. The first thing she noticed was how few apps were installed. No social media, no games, no productivity tools that cluttered David's primary phone. This device had been stripped down to essentials: phone, text messages, camera, and a single contact app. It was a phone designed for a specific purpose, and that realization sent ice through Sarah's veins. Her best friend Maya's voice echoed in her memory from their lunch last week. "You know I love you, but you're wearing those rose-colored glasses so thick you could use them as safety goggles." Maya worked as a private investigator, had seen enough cheating spouses to develop a sixth sense about these things. She'd been dropping hints for months about David's changed behavior, his new gym membership, the way he started caring about his appearance with a meticulousness that felt performative. Sarah opened the text messages with trembling fingers. The most recent conversation was with someone listed as only as A in the contacts. The timestamp showed messages from just 2 hours ago, sent while David was supposedly getting ready for work upstairs. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You were incredible. When can I see you again? This waiting is killing me. I know this is complicated, but I'm falling for you." The responses from A were equally damning, filled with endearments and promises and details about stolen moments that made Sarah's stomach turn. She scrolled up through weeks of messages, each one a small death, each exchange painting a picture of an affair that wasn't just physical, it was emotional, romantic, deep, but it was the photos that broke her. Images of David in restaurants she didn't recognize, his arm around a woman with auburn hair and a smile that spoke of intimacy. Pictures of hotel rooms, of hands intertwined on white sheets, of David's face soft with an expression Sarah hadn't seen directed at her in months. The woman was beautiful in an effortless way, younger than Sarah's 34 years, with the kind of confidence that radiated from the screen. Sarah's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, the phone clutched in her shaking hands. Max pressed against her side, his warm body an anchor in a world that suddenly felt like it was tilting off its axis. 7 years. 7 years of building a life together, of shared dreams and inside jokes and quiet Sunday mornings. 7 years of believing she knew the man who shared her bed, who made her coffee the way she liked it, who still opened car doors for her and remembered her mother's birthday. The house they'd saved for 3 years to buy suddenly felt like a stage set, beautiful and hollow. The kitchen where they'd hosted dinner parties, the living room where they'd watched movies curled together on the couch, the bedroom where they'd made love and shared whispered hopes for the future, all of it contaminated now by the knowledge that David had been living a double life. Sarah scrolled through more messages, each one adding another layer to her understanding of the betrayal. A had a name, Amanda, and from the context of their conversations, she was someone David had met at the gym, the same gym he joined 6 months ago, claiming he needed to get back in shape for health reasons, the same gym where he'd been spending increasingly long hours, coming home sweaty and energized, in a way that Sarah had initially found attractive. The timeline was devastating in its clarity. The first messages started 4 months ago, tentative and flirtatious. By 6 weeks later, they were meeting for coffee. 2 months ago, the relationship had become physical, and for the past month, they'd been talking about a future together, about David leaving Sarah, about starting fresh. "I can't keep living this lie," David had written just 3 days ago. "She deserves better than half a man. We both do." "I know it's hard," Amanda had replied, "but think about how happy we could be. No more sneaking around, no more pretending, just us." "Soon," David had promised. "I just need to figure out how to tell her, how to end it without destroying her completely." Sarah laughed, a sound sharp and bitter in the quiet kitchen. Without destroying her completely. As if there was a gentle way to detonate 7 years of marriage, as if the explosion could somehow be contained. Her phone, her real phone, buzzed on the counter. A text from Maya. "Coffee later? You sounded weird yesterday and I'm worried about you." Maya. Sarah's mind raced as she realized she had someone to turn to, someone who would understand the practical implications of what she'd discovered. Maya had helped other women navigate the treacherous waters of divorce, had seen firsthand how quickly loving husbands could become adversaries when assets and futures were on the line. But first, Sarah needed to document everything. With steady hands that surprised her, she began taking photos of the phone's screen, capturing each damning message, each intimate photo, each promise of a future that didn't include her. Evidence. Maya had taught her that much. In situations like this, evidence was everything. As she worked, fragments of memory began shifting into new patterns. David's distraction during dinner conversations, the way he'd started showering immediately after coming home from the gym, his new habit of taking calls outside, claiming it was work, but speaking in voices too soft and warm for professional conversations. The expensive cologne he'd bought last month, claiming it was for a client meeting, but wearing it more and more frequently. Even their intimate life had changed, she realized now. David had become more adventurous, more attentive in some ways, but there was a performative quality to it that she had attributed to renewed passion in their marriage. Now she understood it differently. He'd been practicing techniques learned with someone else, working out his guilt through increased attention to her pleasure. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Sarah finished documenting the phone's contents and carefully placed it back where she'd found it, wedged between the couch cushions in exactly the same position. David would return from work around 6, she calculated. That gave her 8 hours to decide how to handle this information. 8 hours to figure out whether she wanted to confront him directly or take Maya's advice and lawyer up first. The rain had stopped while she worked, and pale October sunlight now filtered through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny ghosts. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal. The coffee maker's gentle gurgle, Max's contented sighs from his bed by the door, the neighbor's lawnmower starting up across the street. Life continuing as if her world hadn't just imploded. Sarah stood up slowly, her joints stiff from sitting on the floor. In the hallway mirror, she caught sight of herself and was surprised by how unchanged she looked.
Shouldn't betrayal leave visible marks? Shouldn't devastation show on her face like bruises? But she looked the same. Shoulder-length black hair, still neat from her morning routine, brown eyes clear behind wire-rimmed glasses, skin that still held the faint tan from their vacation in Hawaii just 2 months ago, a vacation where David had been especially loving, especially present, or so she thought. Now she wondered if he'd been saying goodbye, creating beautiful last memories before he'd destroyed everything. The phone buzzed in her pocket, her phone this time. Another text from Maya. "Seriously, I'm worried. Call me." Sarah typed back, "Can you come over? I need your help with something." The response was immediate. "On my way. 20 minutes." While she waited, Sarah found herself moving through the house like a detective at a crime scene, looking for other signs she'd missed. In David's closet, she found receipts tucked in suit pockets, dinners for two at restaurants she'd never been to, hotel charges from business trips that had lasted longer than he'd mentioned. A credit card statement folded and hidden behind his cologne bottles showed purchases at lingerie stores, flower shops, and expensive restaurants, all on dates when he'd claimed to be working late or at the gym. Each discovery felt like a fresh wound, but there was also a strange relief in finally understanding the disconnection she'd been feeling for months. She wasn't going crazy. She wasn't being paranoid or needy or overly suspicious, as David had sometimes implied when she questioned his late nights or strange moods. Her instincts had been correct. She just hadn't wanted to believe them. Maya's car pulled into the driveway exactly 20 minutes later. Her red Honda Civic that Sarah had ridden in countless times for girls' nights and shopping trips and emergency ice cream runs after bad days at work. But this time, Maya wasn't coming as a friend planning a fun afternoon. She was coming as a professional who dealt with the aftermath of broken promises and shattered trust. Sarah met her at the door before she could knock. Maya took one look at her face and stepped inside, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Oh, honey," Maya said, her voice gentle but unsurprised. "What did you find?" The question broke something loose in Sarah's chest, and for the first time since discovering the phone, she began to cry. Not pretty tears or delicate sniffles, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose entire foundation had just crumbled. Maya held her in the entryway, stroking her hair and making soft, soothing sounds while Sarah's body shook with the force of her grief. When the storm finally passed, Maya led her to the living room, the same couch where the phone had been hiding, Sarah realized with bitter irony. They sat facing each other, and Sarah found herself staring at the coffee table where she and David had planned their future just weeks ago, spreading out real estate brochures for vacation homes they dreamed of buying. "Tell me everything," Maya said, her voice shifting into the professional tone she'd heard her use with clients, from the beginning. So Sarah told her about the phone, about the messages and photos, about the timeline of deception that painted David's betrayal in devastating detail. Maya listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more serious with each revelation.
"How long have you suspected?" Maya asked when Sarah finished. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Part of me has felt like something was wrong for months, but I kept explaining it away. He was stressed at work or tired or going through a midlife thing. I didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious, paranoid one who doesn't trust her husband." Maya's expression was gentle but firm. "Sarah, trusting your partner doesn't mean ignoring evidence. It means believing they've earned that trust and will continue to earn it. David stopped earning it months ago." The words hit home in a way that felt both devastating and liberating. Sarah had been so committed to being a good wife, a trusting wife, that she'd ignored her own instincts and observations. She'd gaslit herself rather than face the possibility that the man she'd loved for 7 years was capable of such elaborate deception. "What do I do now?" Sarah asked. "Do I confront him? No," Maya said firmly. "Not yet. Right now, you have the advantage of knowing something he doesn't know you know. That's powerful, and you don't want to give it up until you're prepared for what comes next." Maya pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts.
I'm going to give you the number for the best divorce attorney in the city. Her name is Rebecca Martinez, and she's going to help you protect yourself. Because, honey, if David is serious about leaving you for this other woman, you need to be prepared for the possibility that the loving husband you've known might become someone else entirely when it comes to dividing assets and determining your financial future. The word divorce hit Sarah like a physical blow, even though she'd known it was inevitable from the moment she'd seen those messages. Hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that felt both terrifying and strangely empowering. I need you to understand something, Maya continued, her voice gentle but serious. David has been planning this exit for months, maybe longer. He's had time to prepare, to think about how he wants this to go. You're starting from behind, and that's why we need to move quickly to level the playing field. Sarah nodded, feeling a strange calm settling over her. The initial shock was fading, replaced with something harder and more focused. If David wanted to play games with their life together, if he wanted to sneak around and plan his exit while she remained oblivious, then she would show him what a woman who'd been underestimated could accomplish. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the living room. Soon, David would be home, and Sarah would have to sit across from him at dinner, make conversation about their days, pretend everything was normal, while knowing their marriage was already over. The thought made her sick, but it also made her angry, and the anger felt better than the grief. "There's something else," Sarah said suddenly, remembering a detail that had been nagging at her. The phone was locked with Max's birthday. Not ours, not his, our dog's birthday. What kind of person uses their pet's birthday to hide their affair? Maya's expression darkened. The kind of person who's so narcissistic they think they're being clever while simultaneously showing complete contempt for their spouse's intelligence. Sarah, I want you to prepare yourself for the possibility that David is not the man you thought you married. People don't usually start with affairs this elaborate and calculated. This kind of deception, it suggests a pattern of behavior, a way of thinking that doesn't develop overnight. The words sent a chill through Sarah as she began to consider all the other aspects of their relationship with new eyes. David's charm, his ability to make her feel special and chosen, had that been manipulation? His way of handling conflicts, always making her feel like she was overreacting or being unreasonable, had that been gaslighting? The friends who'd slowly disappeared from their social circle, the family members David had convinced her were too dramatic or demanding, had he been isolating her? "I feel so stupid," Sarah whispered. "Don't," Maya said firmly. "Don't you dare blame yourself for trusting someone who promised to be trustworthy. Don't apologize for believing in love and commitment and partnership. Those are good things, Sarah, beautiful things. The fact that David chose to exploit them doesn't make you stupid. It makes him cruel."
Maya stayed until nearly 5 o'clock, helping Sarah make plans for the next few days. She would call Rebecca Martinez first thing in the morning. She would begin quietly documenting their assets and David's recent behavior. She would continue acting normal until she had legal advice about the best way to proceed. Most importantly, she would not confront David until she was prepared for every possible response he might have. As Maya's car pulled out of the driveway, Sarah stood in the kitchen where her morning had begun, where her life had changed forever. The second phone was still hidden between the couch cushions, still containing evidence of David's double life. In a few minutes, she would need to start dinner, to smile and ask about his day, to pretend she didn't know that everything between them had been alive for months. But first, she allowed herself one more moment of stillness, one more breath in the space between ignorance and action. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would start building a new life from the ashes of the old one. Tonight, though, she would simply survive. The sound of David's key in the front door at 6:15 p.m. sent a jolt of adrenaline through Sarah's system that she hadn't expected. She'd been preparing dinner, his favorite pasta dish with the sauce she made from scratch, and her hands were steady as she stirred the simmering tomatoes and herbs.
But hearing his familiar footsteps in the entryway, his usual call of "Honey, I'm home," felt like listening to a stranger perform an elaborate charade. "Smells amazing in here," David said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the smile she'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. He looked exactly the same. Tall and lean, sandy brown hair slightly mussed from his day, blue eyes bright with apparent affection. But Sarah felt like she was seeing him through a different lens entirely. Every gesture, every expression, every word now carried the weight of deception. He crossed the room to kiss her, the same casual peck on the lips that had punctuated thousands of ordinary evenings. Sarah forced herself not to recoil, forced her lips to respond naturally, even as her mind raced with images from the second phone. Those same lips had whispered endearments to Amanda just hours ago. Those same hands, now settling on her waist, had photographed intimate moments with another woman. "How was your day?" David asked, loosening his tie as he moved to pour himself a glass of wine from the bottle she'd opened to cook with. Such a normal question, delivered with such apparent interest. "Quiet," she managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Did some cleaning, caught up on reading. How about you? You seemed stressed this morning when you left." She watched his face carefully as she spoke, looking for tells she'd never bothered to notice before. There, a tiny tightening around his eyes when she mentioned the morning, a barely perceptible pause before he answered. "Just the usual work chaos," he said, settling into his routine complaints about his demanding boss and difficult clients. "You know how it is." But Sarah found herself analyzing every word with new scrutiny. David worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized firm downtown, a job that had never required excessive overtime before this year. Yet according to his stories, he'd been staying late 3 or 4 nights a week, attending client dinners and strategy sessions that always seemed to run until 9 or 10 p.m. She served dinner at the dining room table they'd picked out together during their first year of marriage, complete with the good china and cloth napkins that David had always appreciated. If this was going to be one of their last dinners together, and she suspected it was, based on his messages about telling her soon, she wanted to remember how it felt to play the role of loving wife one final time. "This is incredible," David said, after his first bite, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You spoil me, you know that." The casual intimacy of the gesture, combined with the genuine warmth in his voice, created a cognitive dissonance that made Sarah feel physically sick. This was the man who'd held her when her father died 2 years ago, who'd driven her to the emergency room when she'd had food poisoning, who'd surprised her with a weekend in wine country for their 5th anniversary. That David had been real, she was sure of it. But when had he stopped being real? When had love become performance? "I was thinking," David continued, cutting his pasta with careful precision, "we should plan something special for our anniversary next month. Maybe that trip to Italy we've been talking about." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Their anniversary was 6 weeks away. According to his text messages, David was planning to leave her well before then. The suggestion felt like a particularly cruel form of gaslighting, keeping her focused on a future he had no intention of sharing, while he planned his exit strategy. "That sounds wonderful," she heard herself say. "Though maybe we should wait until after the holidays. Work is going to be crazy for both of us." She was buying time, she realized, though she wasn't sure for what. Time to prepare, time to process, time to figure out how to extract herself from this marriage with dignity intact. David nodded enthusiastically. "You're right, as always. Spring would be better, anyway. Fewer crowds, better weather." He launched into a detailed discussion of possible itineraries, speaking with such apparent sincerity about their imaginary future that Sarah began to wonder if he'd somehow compartmentalized his life so completely that he could genuinely forget about Amanda while planning romantic getaways with his wife. The psychological complexity of what he was doing hit her like a wave. This wasn't just simple infidelity.
It was an elaborate form of emotional manipulation that required sustained deception, careful planning, and a level of callousness that chilled her. David wasn't just cheating, he was actively constructing false realities, managing multiple relationships with the skill of a professional con artist. After dinner, they settled into their usual evening routine. David retreated to his home office to catch up on emails, while Sarah loaded the dishwasher and tried to process the surreal experience of sharing a meal with someone who'd been planning her abandonment over text messages that morning. The normalcy of it all felt like a form of psychological torture. She found herself moving through the house like an archaeologist, examining the artifacts of their shared life with new eyes. The framed photos on the mantel chronicling their relationship, their first vacation together in Napa, their wedding day, Christmas mornings, dinner parties with friends. Had David been thinking about leaving her in that picture from last Thanksgiving where his arm was wrapped around her waist and they were both laughing at something Maya had said? What about the photo from their Hawaiian vacation just 2 months ago, where they looked so happy and connected? In the bathroom they shared, Sarah stared at David's side of the vanity with new understanding. The expensive cologne that had appeared 2 months ago, the teeth whitening strip she'd found in his drawer and assumed were for general health consciousness, the new hair product that had replaced his drugstore shampoo. Even his razor had been upgraded from a basic disposable to some high-tech model that probably cost more than her monthly gym membership. These weren't the changes of a man going through a midlife crisis or trying to improve himself for his wife. These were the grooming habits of a man preparing to attract and keep a new partner. Every upgrade had been an investment in his affair, funded with money from their shared accounts, while Sarah remained completely oblivious. The betrayal felt compound, not just emotional and sexual, but financial and practical. How much of their joint income had gone towards supporting David's double life? How many dinners with Amanda? How many hotel rooms? How many gifts and gestures designed to win her affection? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How are you holding up? Remember what we talked about. Document everything, but don't let on that you know you're doing great." The support felt like a lifeline. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath for hours, her entire body tense with the effort to maintain a facade of normalcy. She texted back, "Harder than I expected. Feels like living with a stranger." Maya's response was immediate. "Because you are. The man you married wouldn't have done this to you. Grieve that version of him, but don't confuse him with the man in your house right now." The words hit home with brutal clarity. Sarah had been operating under the assumption that David was essentially the same person, just someone who'd made terrible choices. But Maya was right. The capacity for this level of sustained deception suggested someone fundamentally different from the man she thought she'd married. People didn't develop the ability to live double lives overnight. It was a skill set that required practice, a mindset that had probably been there all along, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Around 10 o'clock, David emerged from his office with the tired satisfaction of someone who'd accomplished important work. "Finally caught up on everything," he announced, settling onto the couch beside Sarah, where she'd been pretending to read a book while actually replaying every conversation they'd had over the past few months. He reached for the remote, his hand brushing against the couch cushions where his second phone lay hidden just inches away. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched him navigate to Netflix, completely unaware that evidence of his betrayal was close enough to touch. "What do you feel like watching?" he asked, his arms settling around her shoulders in a gesture that would have felt comforting 12 hours ago, but now felt like a violation. "Whatever you want," Sarah managed, though the idea of cuddling with him while pretending everything was normal felt impossible. "I'm actually pretty tired. Think I'll head to bed soon." David's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not disappointment, but something that looked like relief. "You've seemed exhausted lately," he said with apparent concern. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see Dr. Peterson, get some blood work done." The solicitousness in his voice made Sarah's skin crawl.
Was he genuinely concerned about her health? Or was he hoping she'd discover some medical issue that would make his eventual departure feel justified? Poor David, stuck with a sickly wife who couldn't appreciate how vital and alive he was becoming with his new lover. "I'm fine," Sarah said, standing up and manufacturing a yawn. "Just need more sleep." She kissed his forehead, a gesture that felt like goodbye, though he couldn't know that, and headed upstairs to their bedroom. Their bedroom, which would soon be just his bedroom, or maybe not even that if he moved in with Amanda. The bed they'd shared for 7 years felt alien as Sarah lay awake, listening to the sounds of David's evening routine. The television murmuring downstairs, the refrigerator opening and closing as he got his usual bedtime snack, the sound of his footsteps moving through the house, turning off lights and checking locks. When he finally came upstairs an hour later, Sarah feigned sleep as he moved quietly through their bedtime routine. She listened to him brush his teeth, wash his face, change into pajamas, all the intimate, mundane sounds of a marriage that she now understood had been hollow for months. He slipped into bed beside her, and Sarah had to concentrate on keeping her breathing even as he settled into his usual position. For 7 years, she had fallen asleep to the sound of his breathing, had found comfort in the warmth of his body beside hers. Now his presence felt like a threat, a reminder of how completely she'd been fooled. "Love you," David murmured into the darkness, as he did every night. Sarah's throat closed around the automatic response she'd given thousands of times. Instead, she made a soft sound that could have been agreement or acknowledgement or simply the sigh of someone already asleep. But sleep was impossible. Sarah lay rigid in the darkness, her mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. How long before David worked up the courage to tell her about Amanda? Would he ask for a separation first, or would he simply announce he was leaving? Would he try to make it seem like it was her fault somehow? That their marriage had been dying for years, that they'd grown apart naturally, that no one was to blame? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that David's version of events would be carefully constructed to minimize his culpability. He would paint himself as a man who'd tried to make his marriage work, but ultimately had to follow his heart. Amanda would become the great love he'd never expected to find, rather than the affair partner he'd actively pursued. Sarah would be cast as the woman who'd let herself go, who'd become complacent, who had somehow failed to keep her husband interested. The narrative was so predictable it made her angry. David would rewrite our history to justify his actions, turning 7 years of partnership into a story about emotional incompatibility and growing apart. Their friends would be forced to choose sides, and some of them would probably buy David's version of events, especially if Amanda was charming and seemed genuinely in love with him.
But Sarah had something David didn't know she had: evidence. Photographs of his text messages that showed the calculated nature of his deception. Proof of the timeline that revealed his affair had nothing to do with problems in their marriage and everything to do with his own choices. Maya was right. Knowledge was power, and Sarah intended to use every bit of power available to her. Around 2 a.m, David's phone buzzed on his nightstand. Sarah tensed, wondering if it was his regular phone or if Amanda was texting him in the middle of the night. David stirred, reached for the device, and she heard the soft sound of him typing a response. In the darkness, she couldn't tell which phone he was using, but the fact that he was texting someone at 2 a.m. while lying beside his sleeping wife felt like yet another violation. Eventually, exhaustion overcame adrenaline, and Sarah drifted into fitful sleep filled with dreams of drowning, of running through endless corridors looking for exits that didn't exist, of discovering that everyone in her life was actually someone else wearing a mask. She awoke at dawn to find David's side of the bed already empty, the sound of the shower running in their ensuite bathroom. Wednesday morning. Another day of pretending, another performance of marital normalcy while her world remained fundamentally altered. The routine was the same.
Coffee, breakfast, small talk about the weather and their plans for the day. But Sarah found herself studying David's face like she was meeting him for the first time, cataloging details she'd stopped noticing years ago. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, but didn't quite reach his eyes. The habit he had of touching her arm when he spoke, a gesture she'd always found affectionate, but now recognized as potentially manipulative. The smooth way he delivered information about his day, his plans, his schedule. Too smooth, too practiced, like lines he'd rehearsed. "I'll be late again tonight. Client dinner. You know how these things go." Sarah nodded and made understanding noises, but inside she was noting the lie for what it was. According to his text messages, he and Amanda had plans to meet at a hotel downtown. The client dinner was fiction, another story in the elaborate mythology David had constructed to hide his affair. "Which client?" she asked, casually, testing to see how detailed his deception would become. "Morrison Industries," David replied without hesitation. "They're launching that new campaign next month, and Jim wants to go over the media strategy. Probably won't be home until 10 or 11. The lie was so smooth, so complete with specific details, that Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't the clumsy deception of someone new to infidelity. This was the practiced ease of someone who'd been lying for so long that fiction and truth had become equally natural. After David left for work, Sarah stood in her kitchen holding her phone, staring at Rebecca Martinez's number that Maya had given her the day before. This was it, the moment where she stopped being a victim and started being someone who fought back. The moment where she stopped reacting to David's choices and started making her own. She dialed the number before she could lose her nerve. "Rebecca Martinez, this is Rebecca." "Hi," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I need to speak with someone about a divorce." Rebecca Martinez's office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city that had been Sarah's home for the past decade. Sitting across from the attorney's imposing mahogany desk that Thursday morning, Sarah felt small and exposed, like a patient waiting for a terminal diagnosis. Rebecca was nothing like what Sarah had expected. Instead of the sharp-suited, aggressive stereotype of a divorce lawyer, she was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made Sarah feel safe enough to tell the truth. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with family photos and fresh flowers that spoke of someone who understood the human cost of broken marriages. "Tell me everything," Rebecca said, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave out any details, no matter how small they might seem." So Sarah told her about the second phone, about the months of messages that painted a picture of David's double life in devastating detail. She pulled out her own phone, showed Rebecca the photographs she'd taken of the evidence, watching the attorney's expression grow more serious with each image. "This is very thorough documentation," Rebecca said approvingly. "Maya taught you well. How long do you estimate this affair has been going on?" Based on the messages, about 4 months physically, but they were building up to it for longer. The emotional affair probably started 6 months ago, maybe more. Rebecca made notes as she spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about their finances, their shared assets, David's work situation, and Sarah's own career as a freelance graphic designer. The conversation felt clinical and devastating at the same time, reducing 7 years of marriage to a list of assets to be divided and legal strategies to be deployed. "I need you to understand something, Sarah," Rebecca said when they'd covered the basic facts. "Based on what you've shown me, this isn't a case of a marriage that gradually fell apart. This is systematic deception. David has been planning this exit for months, and he's been careful about it. That suggests he may have been preparing financially as well." The words sent a chill through Sarah. "What do you mean?" I mean, we need to look very carefully at your joint accounts, your credit cards, your retirement funds, and any other assets. People who are this methodical about hiding affairs are often equally methodical about hiding money. We need to make sure David hasn't been moving assets or preparing to claim that marital funds are separate property. Sarah's stomach dropped. The possibility that David's betrayal extended beyond emotional and sexual infidelity into financial manipulation felt like discovering another layer of violation she hadn't even considered. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What should I be looking for? Sarah asked. Large withdrawals, new accounts opened in his name only, changes to beneficiaries on insurance policies or retirement accounts, unusual spending patterns. Also, we need to move quickly to establish a paper trail of the marital assets as they exist right now before David realizes you know about the affair. Rebecca's efficiency was both comforting and terrifying. Over the next hour, they developed a strategy that felt like preparing for war. Sarah would continue acting normal while secretly documenting everything. She would gather financial records, copy important documents, and begin establishing her own separate accounts. Most importantly, she would not confront David until they were legally prepared for every possible response. "How long do you think I have?" Sarah asked as their meeting wound down. "Based on the messages you showed me, not long. He's talking about telling you soon, and people usually follow through on those statements within days or weeks, not months. We need to assume you have very little time to prepare." Walking back to her car in the parking garage, Sarah felt like she was inhabiting two different realities simultaneously. In one reality, she was a woman whose marriage was ending, who would soon be alone in a house that would probably have to be sold, and who would have to rebuild her entire life from scratch. In the other reality, she was still Mrs. David Chen, a woman whose biggest concern should be deciding what to make for dinner and whether to meet Maya for lunch on Saturday. The disconnect was disorienting, but beneath the confusion was something else, a growing sense of her own agency. For months, she'd been a passive participant in her marriage, reacting to David's moods and changes without questioning their source. Now, finally, she was gathering information and making plans. It felt terrifying and empowering at the same time. Her phone rang as she was driving home. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, her heart hammered with panic. Did he somehow know where I'd been? Had he discovered that he'd found his phone? "Hey, honey," she answered, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "Hi, beautiful. I was just thinking about you." David's voice carried that warm, intimate tone that had always made her feel special. Now it made her skin crawl. "Listen, I have some bad news about tonight. The client dinner got moved to tomorrow, but Jim wants me to stay late and work on some revisions to the campaign. I probably won't be home until after midnight."
The lie was so smooth, so considerate in its delivery, that Sarah almost admired the craftsmanship. David wasn't just deceiving her. He was making the deception feel like a sacrifice he was making for their shared financial benefit. "That's okay," Sarah said. "I'll probably just order takeout and catch up on some client work myself. You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were like a slap. Sarah ended the call and pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking too badly to drive safely. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. David expressing gratitude for her understanding while planning to spend the evening with his mistress. She sat in her car on the side of a busy suburban street, watching normal people go about their normal lives, and felt like an alien observing human behavior from the outside. That morning, she'd been one of those normal people. Now she was someone else entirely, a woman whose husband was systematically dismantling their marriage while pretending to cherish her support and understanding. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How did it go with Rebecca?" Sarah typed back, "Good. Scary, but good. Can you come over tonight? David will be working late again." On my way as soon as I'm done with work. We're going to get through this, honey, one day at a time. The support felt like oxygen. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath for days, trying to process this massive betrayal alone. Having Maya as an ally made the difference between drowning and treading water. That afternoon, while David was presumably at his actual job, Sarah began the grim work of forensic accounting. Armed with Rebecca's instructions, she logged into their joint bank accounts and began printing out months of statements. What she found there made her sink into David's desk chair with a sense of vertigo. Over the past 6 months, there had been dozens of charges she'd never questioned. Dinners at expensive restaurants on nights when David claimed to be working, hotel charges during supposed business trips, purchases at jewelry stores and lingerie boutiques. The financial footprint of David's affair was extensive and expensive, funded entirely with money from their joint accounts. But more disturbing were the larger transactions. David had moved $15,000 from their savings account to a checking account in his name only, claiming it was for a business investment opportunity he'd mentioned briefly months ago. He'd also changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy from Sarah to his mother, a change that had been buried in routine paperwork she'd signed without reading carefully. Each discovery felt like another small death, another piece of evidence that David had been preparing for this exit far longer and more systematically than even his text messages had suggested. He hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been planning a complete financial separation while keeping Sarah in the dark about every aspect of his strategy. The doorbell rang at 6 o'clock, and Sarah opened it to find Maya standing on her porch holding a bottle of wine and a bag of Thai takeout. Figured you probably hadn't eaten and that you could use some liquid courage for what comes next. They spread the financial documents across the dining room table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, trying to construct a complete picture of David's deception. Maya's experience as a private investigator proved invaluable. She knew what to look for, which patterns suggested deliberate concealment versus normal spending variations. "This is good," Maya said, reviewing the evidence Sarah had gathered. "Really good. Rebecca is going to be able to use this to show that David was planning his exit long before any supposed problems in the marriage. Courts don't like it when one spouse systematically prepares to leave while keeping the other spouse ignorant of their intentions." "I keep thinking I should feel angrier," Sarah admitted over her second glass of wine. "Instead, I just feel numb. Like this is happening to someone else." "That's shock," Maya said gently. "Your brain is protecting you from the full impact while you process what you can handle. The anger will come later, and when it does, it's going to be fierce. That's okay. You're allowed to be furious about this." They worked until nearly 11 o'clock, organizing documents and creating a timeline of David's financial deception that paralleled the timeline of his emotional betrayal. When they finished, the dining room table looked like the headquarters of a major investigation, which Sarah supposed it was. "What happens next?" Sarah asked as Maya prepared to leave. "You keep gathering evidence, keep acting normal, and wait for Rebecca to tell you when it's time to make your move. And Sarah, you document everything. Every lie he tells you, every excuse he makes, every time his story doesn't add up. All of it matters." After Maya left, Sarah sat alone in the house that suddenly felt like a museum of her former life. Every room contained artifacts of the marriage she'd thought she had, photos of happy vacations that may have been performed happiness, gifts David had given her that might have been guilt offerings, shared memories that were now contaminated by the knowledge of his deception. She was cleaning up the financial documents when she heard David's key in the door at 12:30 a.m. Earlier than he'd predicted, but still late enough to support his story of working overtime. Sarah had prepared for this moment, had practiced the casual greeting of a wife who trusted her husband completely. "How did the revisions go?" she asked as he hung up his coat. "Brutal," David said, and he did look tired, though Sarah now wondered if the exhaustion came from work or from the emotional strain of maintaining multiple relationships.
Jim had us rework the entire campaign from scratch. I'm going to be useless tomorrow." He moved through his arrival routine with the ease of long practice, kissing her cheek, asking about her day, pouring himself a glass of water from the kitchen tap. The performance was flawless, and Sarah found herself wondering how many times he'd rehearsed these moments, how carefully he'd crafted each gesture to convey exhausted dedication rather than guilty concealment. "Poor baby," she heard herself say, the endearment automatic after years of offering comfort for his work stress. "Why don't you go up to bed? I'll be there in a few minutes." But as David headed upstairs, Sarah caught something she'd never noticed before: the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt. Not strong enough to be obvious, but there if you knew to look for it. Another small piece of evidence in the growing mountain of proof that the man she'd married had become someone else entirely. Friday morning brought a new wrinkle in David's behavior that sent alarm bells ringing through Sarah's consciousness. Instead of his usual rushed departure for work, he lingered over breakfast, asking detailed questions about her plans for the day and weekend that felt more like reconnaissance than casual interest. "Maya mentioned you two might get together this weekend," he said, buttering his toast with careful precision. "That'll be nice. You haven't seen much of each other lately." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She hadn't mentioned Maya's name to David in weeks, and certainly hadn't said anything about weekend plans that hadn't been finalized until the night before. The only way David could know about Maya's visit was if he'd been monitoring her phone calls or text messages. "When did I mention that?" Sarah asked carefully. "Oh, I don't know, yesterday sometime, or maybe I saw it on your phone when you left it on the counter." David's tone was casual, but there was something watchful in his eyes that made Sarah's skin crawl. The violation felt enormous. Not only was David betraying her with another woman, but he was also invading her privacy, monitoring her communications, keeping track of her relationships and activities. The level of control and surveillance suggested someone with a deeply controlling personality, or someone who was worried about what his wife might discover if left to her own devices. "That's weird," Sarah said, keeping her voice light. "I don't remember talking to her about specific plans, but you know how these things go. We'll probably just end up wandering around the mall or something equally exciting." David laughed, but it sounded forced. "Well, have fun with whatever you decide to do. I'll probably be working most of the weekend anyway. This campaign is turning into a nightmare."
After he left, Sarah immediately called Rebecca Martinez. "He's monitoring your communications," Rebecca said without hesitation, after Sarah explained the morning's conversation. "That changes our timeline significantly. If David is tracking your activities, it means he's suspicious that you might know something. We need to move faster than we planned." "How much faster?" "I'm filing papers today. We'll serve him with divorce documents Monday morning. I know that's not ideal in terms of preparation time, but if David is getting paranoid about your activities, waiting longer could be dangerous." The word dangerous sent a chill through Sarah. "You think he might—" "What exactly?" "I think he might accelerate his own timeline, possibly in ways that aren't in your best interest. People who are capable of this level of deception and control often don't react well when they feel like they're losing that control. Better to take action while you still have the advantage of surprise." Rebecca's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she spent Friday afternoon making copies of important documents and quietly moving personal items to a safety deposit box she'd opened that morning at a different bank. The wedding photos, her grandmother's jewelry, important papers, anything that held either financial or sentimental value that she couldn't bear to lose in what was clearly going to be a contentious divorce. The house felt different as she moved through it, already taking on the quality of a place she was preparing to leave. The kitchen where she'd cooked thousands of meals, the living room where they'd hosted friends and celebrated holidays, the bedroom where they'd shared intimate moments that she now questioned. All of it was transforming from home to crime scene, from sanctuary to place of deception. That evening, David returned from work in an unusually good mood, bringing flowers and a bottle of expensive wine. "What's the occasion?" Sarah asked, accepting the bouquet with what she hoped looked like pleased surprise. "Do I need an occasion to bring my beautiful wife flowers?" David's smile was dazzling, his charm turned up to maximum volume. I was thinking we could have a nice dinner, open this wine, maybe watch that movie you've been wanting to see. The sudden attention felt like a trap, though Sarah couldn't figure out what kind. Was this guilt over his planned revelation, a last romantic gesture before he destroyed their marriage, or something else entirely? A test to see how she'd react to unexpected affection. That sounds lovely, Sarah said, because what else could she say? Should I order something, or do you want to cook together? Let's cook, David said, already moving toward the kitchen with an energy she hadn't seen from him in months. Like we used to, when we were first married. Remember how we'd spend entire Saturdays cooking elaborate meals and drinking too much wine? Sarah did remember, and the memory felt like a knife in her chest. Those early years had been magical. Two people genuinely in love, building a life together with joy and optimism and complete trust in their shared future. When had that man disappeared? When had David become someone capable of such calculated betrayal? They cooked together in a parody of their former intimacy, David chatting and laughing and touching her arm while Sarah played her part in the charade. The wine made it easier to smile and respond naturally, but it also made her more aware of how fundamentally the dynamic between them had shifted. She was no longer participating in their marriage. She was studying it, analyzing every interaction for signs of manipulation or deception. Over dinner, David launched into stories about work that were more detailed and entertaining than anything he had shared in months. He asked about her current design projects with apparent genuine interest, complimented her cooking, suggested weekend activities they might enjoy together. The performance was masterful, and Sarah found herself wondering what had prompted this sudden return to courtship behavior. "You seem really happy tonight," she observed over dessert.
"I am happy," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking lately about how lucky I am to have you, how good we are together. Sometimes I think we get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff that we forget to appreciate what we have." The words were like poison delivered with honey. Sarah nodded and made appropriate responses, but inside, she was reeling from the sheer audacity of it. David was planning to leave her for another woman while simultaneously declaring his appreciation for their marriage. The cognitive dissonance required to sustain such contradictions suggested a level of self-deception that was almost impressive in its scope. As they cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in a dance perfected over years of shared domesticity, Sarah felt like she was participating in her own funeral. This was probably their last evening together as a married couple who loved each other, or at least as a married couple where one person still believed they loved each other. "I love you," David said, as they headed upstairs, his arm around her waist in a gesture that felt both familiar and alien. "I love you too," Sarah replied automatically, the words tasteless in her mouth. In bed that night, David was more affectionate than he'd been in months, holding her close and stroking her hair as they settled into sleep. Sarah lay rigid in his arms, hyper-aware of every point of contact between their bodies, wondering if this tenderness was genuine emotion or another layer of manipulation. Saturday morning brought Maya to the door early, armed with coffee and pastries and a determination to keep Sarah distracted while they waited for Monday's legal proceedings to begin. "How are you holding up?" Maya asked, as they settled in the living room with their breakfast. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," Sarah admitted. Last night, David was the most attentive and loving he's been in months. If I didn't have the evidence from his phone, I'd almost believe that I imagined everything. Maya's expression was grim. That's called love bombing, and it's a classic manipulation tactic. When people sense they're losing control over someone, they often respond by overwhelming them with affection and attention. It's designed to make you doubt your own perceptions and feel guilty for questioning their motives. The clinical explanation helped, but it also made Sarah feel sick. Every gesture of affection from David was now suspect, every kindness potentially calculated. How long had their marriage been a psychological chess game where she didn't even know she was playing? They spent the day doing normal friend activities, shopping, getting manicures, seeing a movie. But underneath the surface normalcy, Sarah felt like she was waiting for an explosion. Monday was coming, and with it, the end of her marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. That evening, David suggested they go out to dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date 8 years ago. Sarah agreed, though the symbolism felt ominous rather than romantic. Was this David's way of saying goodbye to their shared history? Or was it another test, another way of gauging her suspicions and reactions? The restaurant was exactly as Sarah remembered it, dimly lit, intimate, filled with couples celebrating anniversaries and special occasions. David ordered the same bottle of wine they'd shared on that first magical evening when Sarah had known with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with her future husband. "Do you remember what we talked about that night?" David asked, over their appetizers. Sarah did remember. They'd talked about their dreams, their values, their hopes for the future. David had spoken about wanting to build something lasting with someone he could trust completely. He'd said he was tired of games and pretense, that he wanted a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. "We talked about being honest with each other," Sarah said, the irony almost unbearable, about how important trust was in a relationship. David nodded, his expression serious. "I still believe that. I hope you know that I would never do anything to violate your trust, Sarah. You're the most important person in my world." The lie was so enormous, so bold in its complete contradiction of reality, that Sarah felt dizzy. David was looking directly into her eyes as he spoke, his expression sincere and loving, while planning to leave her for another woman he'd been sleeping with for months. "I know," Sarah managed, though the words felt like choking.
On the drive home, David was quiet, seemingly lost in thought. Sarah wondered what he was thinking about, whether he was remembering their early happiness with genuine nostalgia or calculating the best way to end their marriage with minimal damage to his reputation. Sunday passed in a blur of ordinary domestic activities that felt surreal given what was coming. David worked in his home office while Sarah caught up on client projects, both of them maintaining the fiction of normal married life while preparing for its destruction. That night, as they went through their bedtime routine for what Sarah knew would be the last time, she found herself memorizing details she'd taken for granted for years. The way David hummed unconsciously while brushing his teeth, the careful way he folded his clothes before putting them in the hamper, the ritual of checking the doors and turning off lights that had become second nature. In the morning, everything would change. By tomorrow night, David would know that Sarah had discovered his affair, and their marriage would be officially over. The life they'd built together, however flawed and false it had ultimately become, would be reduced to a legal proceeding and a division of assets. "Good night, sweetheart," David said, kissing her forehead as they settled into bed. "Good night," Sarah whispered, closing her eyes and trying to prepare herself for the war that was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline October clarity that made the world seem sharper, more defined. Sarah woke at dawn, her body thrumming with nervous energy despite having barely slept. Beside her, David was still unconscious, his face peaceful in a way that made her chest ache with the memory of mornings when that peace had been genuine, when their shared bed had been a sanctuary rather than a stage for deception. At 8:30 a.m., exactly 1 hour after David left for work with his usual kiss and promise to call later, Rebecca Martinez's process server would arrive at his office. The divorce papers were already prepared, the financial discovery motions filed, the legal machinery set in motion. By lunchtime, David would know that his carefully constructed double life had been exposed. Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, making coffee she was too nervous to drink, checking her phone obsessively for updates from Rebecca, and jumping at every sound from the street outside. The house felt like a bunker, familiar but no longer safe.
filled with the ghosts of 7 years of shared memories that would never look the same again. At 9:15, her phone rang. Rebecca's name on the screen made Sarah's heart slam against her ribs. "It's done," Rebecca said without preamble. "David was served 20 minutes ago at his office. According to my process server, he went completely white and asked if he could call his wife. She told him that wouldn't be advisable until he'd retained counsel." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. After days of planning and preparation, the actual moment felt surreal. "How long before he calls you?" "Probably within the hour." "Are you ready for that conversation?" "As ready as anyone could be for the conversation that would officially end their marriage," Sarah supposed. They'd rehearsed various scenarios, but there was no way to predict how David would react to discovery. Would he be angry? Devastated? Would he try to deny everything, despite the overwhelming evidence? Would he attempt to manipulate her into reconciliation? "Remember," Rebecca continued, "don't discuss the case with him. Don't let him draw you into negotiations or emotional manipulation. Everything goes through the lawyers now. If he wants to talk about anything substantive, tell him to have his attorney contact me." At 9:47, David's name appeared on Sarah's phone screen. She stared at it through 3 rings before answering, her voice surprisingly steady when she spoke. "Hello, David." "Sarah." His voice was hoarse, strained. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do."
A long pause. Sarah could hear office sounds in the background. Phones ringing, muffled conversations, the normal bustle of a workplace where David's world had just imploded, while everyone else went about their ordinary Monday morning. "Please," David said. And for the first time in months, his voice carried genuine emotion instead of practiced charm. "Just, can I come home? Can we talk about this like adults?" "You can come get some clothes," Sarah said, proud of how calm she sounded. "But we don't have anything to discuss. Everything goes through the lawyers now." "Sarah, I know you're angry, but you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." The words came out sharper than she had intended. "I understand that you've been having an affair with Amanda for 4 months. I understand that you've been lying to me every single day, using our joint money to fund your relationship with her, and planning to leave me while pretending to be a loving husband. What exactly don't I understand, David?" The silence stretched so long that Sarah wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller, defeated. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "The phone," he said more to himself than to her. "You found the phone." Sarah didn't confirm or deny it. Let him wonder about the scope of her knowledge, the extent of his exposure. Let him experience the same uncertainty and paranoia she'd been living with for days. "I'll be there in an hour," David said. "We need to—" "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "You'll be here when I say you can be here, and it won't be today. I'll text you when you can come for your things. Until then, stay away from my house." "Your house?" David's tone shifted, and Sarah heard the first hint of the anger she'd been expecting. "Sarah, let's not get crazy here. We're both adults. We can handle this maturely without lawyers and drama and—" Sarah hung up. Her hands were shaking as she set the phone down, but underneath the tremor was something solid and fierce. For the first time in their entire relationship, she'd held the power in a conversation with David. She'd been the one with information he wanted, the one setting boundaries he had to respect. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The phone rang immediately. David calling back. She let it go to voicemail. He called 6 more times over the next hour, each call going unanswered. When she finally listened to the messages, they charted David's psychological journey from pleading to angry to manipulative to desperate.
Sarah, please pick up. I know you're hurt, but we can work through this. We love each other. Don't throw away 7 years over a mistake. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. We're married, for Christ's sake. We talk to each other. We don't hide behind lawyers. I don't know what Maya has been telling you, but she's always hated me. Don't let her poison you against us. We're stronger than this. Please, baby, just talk to me. Let me explain what really happened. It's not what you think. The messages revealed more about David's character than years of marriage had. Faced with exposure, he defaulted to the classic playbook of emotional manipulation, minimizing his actions, blaming others, attempting to rewrite history, and appealing to sentiment when logic failed. Maya arrived at noon with lunch and moral support, finding Sarah pacing the living room like a caged animal. "How do you feel?" Maya asked, pulling Sarah into a fierce hug. "Like I'm gonna throw up, but also relieved? Is that weird? I feel relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore."
Not weird at all. You've been carrying the weight of his deception for days. Now it's his burden to carry. They ate sandwiches at the kitchen table while Sarah replayed her phone conversation with David, analyzing every word for hidden meanings and future strategies. "He's going to try to control the narrative," Maya observed. "Make this about your reaction rather than his actions." Classic deflection technique. What do you think he'll do next? Probably show up here whether you want him to or not. Men like David don't handle loss of control well. Be prepared for him to get increasingly desperate as he realizes he can't charm or manipulate his way out of this. As if summoned by their conversation, David's car pulled into the driveway at 2:30 p.m. Sarah watched from the living room window as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, apparently steeling himself for what was coming. When he finally got out, he looked older than he had that morning, his usual confident posture replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. He rang the doorbell rather than using his key, a small acknowledgement that the rules had changed, that this was no longer automatically his home. Sarah opened the door but didn't invite him in, keeping the screen door locked between them. "You look beautiful," David said, his voice soft and intimate. Even in crisis, his first instinct was to use charm as a weapon. "What do you want, David?" "I want to explain. I want you to understand how this happened because it's not what you think it is." "It's not what I think it is? I think you've been having an affair with Amanda for months while lying to me every single day. I think you've been using our money to fund your relationship with her. I think you've been planning to leave me while pretending to love me. Which part of that isn't what I think it is?" David flinched as if she'd slapped him. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant for any of this." "But it did happen. Every day for months, you made the choice to betray me. Every morning when you kissed me goodbye, every evening when you came home and told me about your day, every night when you said you loved me, you chose to lie." "I do love you." David's eyes were bright with tears that looked genuine. "That's what makes this so complicated. I love you, but I'm also in love with someone else." "I know. I read the messages, David. All of them." The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. Sarah watched as the last hope drained from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "How much did you see?" "Everything. The photos, the plans to leave me, the discussions about your future together, the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases, the lies about working late. All of it." David leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking every one of his 36 years. "Sarah, I need you to understand." "No. You need to understand. This marriage is over. I've filed for divorce, I've retained an attorney, and I've documented everything. There's nothing left to explain or justify or apologize for. It's done." "Just like that? 7 years and you're just done?" The question was so tone-deaf, so lacking in self-awareness that Sarah felt a flash of pure rage cut through her exhaustion. "Just like that?
David, you've been planning your exit for months. You've been sleeping with another woman, spending our money on her, making plans for a future that doesn't include me. You ended this marriage a long time ago. I'm just making it official. But we could try to work through this. Couples survive affairs. We could go to counseling. We could what? Pretend that you didn't systematically deceive me for months? Pretend that you didn't violate every promise you made to me? Pretend that I can ever trust you again? Sarah shook her head. I don't want to work through this, David. I want you out of my life. The finality in her voice seemed to penetrate David's denial. He stared at her through the screen door as if seeing her for the first time, and Sarah realized that he'd never actually believed she would leave him. Despite all his planning to leave her, he'd never considered the possibility that she might choose to leave him first. "What about the house?" he asked, his voice smaller. "What about it? Are you going to stay here?" Sarah hadn't thought that far ahead, but something about his question, the assumption that she would be the one displaced, that his choices would determine her living situation, crystallized her resolve. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm staying. This is my home." David nodded slowly, accepting this piece of information like another small defeat. "When can I get my things?" "This weekend. Maya will be here to supervise." "Supervise?" The word sparked the first flash of David's old arrogance. "Sarah, I'm not going to steal from my own house." "It's not your house anymore," Sarah said simply. "And given your track record with honesty, I'd prefer to have a witness." David opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. The fight was draining out of him, replaced with something that looked like genuine grief. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. Sarah studied his face, looking for any trace of the man she'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. He was still there, buried under layers of selfishness and deception, but he felt like a stranger now. "But I did hurt you," she said. "Every day for months, you chose to hurt me. And the worst part is that you hurt me while pretending to love me, while making me complicit in my own betrayal by trusting you." David's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." The apology she'd been unconsciously waiting for finally came, but it felt hollow now. Too little and too late. Sorry didn't undo months of deception. Sorry didn't restore her ability to trust. Sorry didn't give her back the version of their relationship she'd believed in until 5 days ago. "I know you are," Sarah said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "But sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't make this fixable." David stood on her porch for another minute, as if waiting for her to change her mind, to invite him in, to offer some path back to the life they had shared. When it didn't come, when Sarah simply stood there looking at him with eyes that held no forgiveness or hope, he turned and walked back to his car. Sarah watched him drive away, this man who had been the center of her world for 7 years, and felt nothing but relief. The hardest conversation of her life was over, and she'd survived it with her dignity intact and her resolve unshaken. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How did it go?" "Better than expected. I think he finally understands it's over."
Good. Expect him to try different tactics over the next few days. Anger, bargaining, promises to change. Stay strong. You've got this. That evening, Maya came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine to celebrate what she called Sarah's Liberation Day. They ate dinner in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of Sarah's married life, and talked about the future for the first time in days. "What do you want to do first?" Maya asked. "Now that you're free to do whatever you want?" Sarah considered the question. For months, her life had been shaped by David's schedule, his needs, his moods. She'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions based purely on her own desires. "I want to redecorate," she said finally. "I want to paint the bedroom a color David would hate.
I want to get rid of all the furniture we picked out together and start fresh." "That sounds perfect," Maya said, raising her wine glass. "To new beginnings and fresh paint." As they clinked glasses, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of tension she'd been carrying for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. For the first time in months, the future felt like something that belonged to her. Over the next 3 days, David's behavior followed the pattern Rebecca had predicted with depressing accuracy. Tuesday brought flowers delivered to Sarah's door with a card that read, "Please don't give up on us." Wednesday brought a series of texts, alternating between desperate pleas and subtle threats about the financial consequences of divorce. Thursday brought an attempt to use their mutual friends as intermediaries, with David calling Sarah's college roommate Jessica to express his concern about Sarah's emotional state and suggest that she might be making rash decisions. Jessica immediately called Sarah. "He sounded really manipulative," she said bluntly, "like he was trying to get me to convince you to take him back without actually admitting he'd done anything wrong. What a piece of shit." The validation from someone who'd known them as a couple felt important. David had always been charming with their friends, and Sarah had worried that some of them might buy his version of events when the divorce became public knowledge. But Jessica's immediate recognition of his manipulation tactics reassured Sarah that she wasn't crazy, that David's behavior was as transparently selfish as it felt. Friday afternoon brought the call Sarah had been dreading. David's attorney, a man named Richard Blackstone, whose name alone suggested the kind of aggressive representation that wealthy men hired when they wanted to punish their ex-wives. "Miss Chen," Blackstone's voice was smooth and patronizing, "I represent your husband in this unfortunate matter. I'd like to discuss the possibility of mediation rather than protracted litigation that will be expensive and painful for both parties." Sarah had been coached for this conversation. "All communication goes through my attorney, Mr. Blackstone. Please contact Rebecca Martinez." Of course. But I thought perhaps we could have a brief, informal conversation about your husband's deep remorse and his desire to work things out. He's willing to end his friendship with the other party and commit to marriage counseling. Surely that's worth considering before we involve the courts in what should be a private matter. The offer was exactly what Rebecca had predicted. David attempting to negotiate from a position of weakness while making it sound like he was offering Sarah a generous gift. The fact that he was describing his months-long affair as a friendship and positioning counseling as a concession rather than the bare minimum told Sarah everything she needed to know about his level of genuine remorse. "Mr. Blackstone, I've said everything I need to say. Contact my attorney." Sarah hung up feeling proud of herself for not engaging with the manipulation, but also drained by the realization that this was just the beginning. David wasn't going to accept the end of their marriage gracefully. He was going to fight, and it was going to get ugly.
That evening, as Sarah sat in her living room reviewing the financial documents Rebecca had requested, she found herself thinking about the woman David was leaving her for, Amanda. The name had become a presence in Sarah's life, a ghost haunting the edges of every conversation and decision. Sarah had avoided looking her up online, partly out of self-preservation and partly because it felt like giving David and his affair more power over her thoughts than they deserved. But tonight, alone in the house that felt more like hers with each passing day, curiosity finally won. Amanda's social media profiles were easier to find than Sarah had expected. Amanda Rodriguez, 28 years old, a marketing coordinator at a tech startup downtown. Her Instagram was full of photos that painted a picture of someone young, ambitious, and blissfully unaware of the destruction she'd helped cause. Or perhaps aware, but unconcerned. The photos with David were carefully cropped to avoid showing his face clearly, a level of discretion that suggested Amanda knew he was married,
despite what David might have told Sarah about the affair being complicated. In several recent posts, Amanda was wearing jewelry that Sarah recognized from David's credit card statements, pieces he'd bought while telling Sarah he was working late. But what struck Sarah most wasn't anger or jealousy, it was pity. Amanda was clearly head over heels in love with David, posting song lyrics and inspirational quotes about finding your soulmate and fighting for love. She had no idea what David was really like, what he was capable of. She thought she'd won the prize, not realizing she'd inherited a man who was capable of systematic deception and emotional manipulation. Sarah found herself wondering how long it would take David to get bored with Amanda, how long before he started looking for excitement elsewhere. Because men who cheated on wives they claimed to love didn't suddenly become faithful when they got what they wanted. They became men who cheated on girlfriends, then wives, then girlfriends again, in an endless cycle of pursuing novelty and ego validation. Amanda would learn this eventually, probably sooner than she expected. But by then, Sarah would be long gone, building a life that didn't depend on trusting someone who'd proven himself untrustworthy. Saturday morning brought David to collect his belongings, accompanied by his brother Mark and a rental truck that seemed too large for the items he was actually entitled to take. Sarah watched from the living room window as they carried out clothes, books, electronics, and personal items that had once been integrated into their shared life. Maya had arrived early to serve as witness and moral support, positioning herself in the kitchen where she could observe the proceedings without interfering. Her presence was both comforting and necessary. Sarah had learned not to underestimate David's ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. "He keeps looking toward the house," Maya observed, peering through the kitchen curtains. "Like he's hoping you'll come out and stop him." Sarah had no intention of making this easier for David. She'd said everything she needed to say during their phone conversation and his visit earlier in the week. Now it was simply a matter of letting him experience the natural consequences of his choices. The process took 3 hours, during which Sarah stayed inside and tried to focus on client work, while the sounds of her marriage being dismantled echoed from outside. When it was over, when David's truck had pulled away and taken with it the last physical traces of his presence in her home, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. "How does it feel?" Maya asked, settling beside Sarah on the couch that no longer contained David's phone. "Empty," Sarah said honestly, "but empty in a good way, like I've been carrying around a weight I didn't realize was there." That evening, Sarah called her parents in California to tell them about the divorce. The conversation was difficult. Her parents had loved David, had considered him the son they'd never had. But they rallied around her with fierce protective love that reminded Sarah she wasn't alone in this fight. "We never quite trusted him," her mother admitted. "There was something too smooth about him, too rehearsed. But you seemed so happy, and we thought maybe we were just being overprotective."
The validation was healing in a way Sarah hadn't expected. Her instincts hadn't been wrong. Other people had sensed something off about David's performance of perfection. She'd been too close to see it, too invested in believing in the fantasy they'd built together. Sunday brought a different kind of emotional challenge when Sarah attended the church she and David had joined together 3 years earlier. Sitting alone in the pew they'd shared every week, surrounded by couples and families who knew them as a unit, felt like announcing her failure to the world. But when Pastor Williams asked about David during the informal greeting time, Sarah found herself answering with honesty rather than shame. "We're getting divorced," she said simply. "David had an affair, and our marriage is over." The words felt powerful rather than humiliating. She wasn't making excuses or softening the blow or protecting David's reputation. She was stating facts and claiming her right to be treated with dignity and respect. The response from their church community was overwhelmingly supportive. Within days, Sarah's phone was full of offers to help with anything she needed: meals, moving assistance, legal referrals, or simply someone to talk to when the loneliness became overwhelming.
I had no idea so many people had suspected something was wrong with David, Sarah told Maya over lunch on Tuesday. It's like everyone was just waiting for me to wake up and see what they'd been seeing for months. That's how it works with master manipulators. They're very good at fooling their primary targets while showing their true colors to people who don't matter to them. David didn't care what your friends thought of him as long as you believed in his act. The insight was both validating and disturbing. Sarah began to reconsider years of social interactions through this new lens, remembering times when friends had made subtle comments about David that she dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. How many red flags had she ignored because she was so committed to believing in their love story? 2 weeks after serving David with divorce papers, Rebecca called with an update that changed everything. David's attorney just contacted me with a settlement offer, Rebecca said, her voice carefully neutral. It's, interesting. Interesting how? Interesting in that it's almost exactly what we would have asked for if we'd had to go to trial. Full house ownership to you, fair division of retirement accounts, alimony for 3 years while you rebuild your client base. It's like David is eager to settle quickly rather than fight for anything. Sarah was surprised by her own disappointment. Part of her had been prepared for a battle, had been looking forward to presenting all her evidence of David's deception and manipulation in court. The idea that he might escape consequences for his behavior by simply signing papers felt anticlimactic. Why would he agree to such generous terms? Sarah asked. 2 possibilities. Either his guilt is genuine and he wants to make amends financially, or he's hiding assets and figures this settlement is cheaper than discovery proceedings that might uncover what he's concealing. The second possibility sent a chill through Sarah. What kind of assets? Could be anything. Secret accounts, investments in his girlfriend's name, plans to start a business with funds he's already diverted. We won't know unless we dig deeper, but that would require rejecting his settlement offer and going to trial. Sarah thought about Amanda's expensive jewelry, about David's mysterious business investment, and about the months of careful planning that had preceded his decision to reveal his affair. A man capable of such long-term deception was certainly capable of financial manipulation. I want to dig deeper, Sarah said firmly. I want to know exactly what David has been hiding.
Rebecca's approval was evident in her voice. I was hoping you'd say that. Men like David don't usually offer generous settlements out of guilt. They offer them because they think it's the cheapest way to escape accountability. The decision to reject David's settlement offer and demand full financial disclosure felt like choosing war over peace, but it also felt like choosing self-respect over expedience. Sarah had spent too many years accepting David's version of reality without question. She wasn't going to start her post-marriage life by trusting him again. When David's attorney called to express surprise at Sarah's rejection of the extremely generous settlement offer, Rebecca was ready. My client is entitled to a complete accounting of the marital assets, Rebecca told Blackstone in a conference call that Sarah listened to from her kitchen table. Given Mr. Chen's demonstrated capacity for deception, we're not comfortable proceeding without full transparency. The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Blackstone spoke, his voice noticeably cooler. This is going to be expensive and time-consuming for both parties, Ms. Martinez. Are you sure your client wants to pursue this course of action? Very sure, Rebecca replied smoothly. We'll see you in court. After the call ended, Sarah sat in her kitchen feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She was about to go to war with a man who'd spent months outmaneuvering her psychologically and financially. But for the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she felt like she was fighting from a position of strength rather than reacting from a position of weakness. Bring it on, she said aloud to the empty house, her voice stronger than she'd heard it in months. Outside, October was giving way to November, the trees in her neighborhood painting themselves in shades of red and gold that spoke of endings and transformations. Sarah's marriage was over, but her life was just beginning, and this time she was writing the story of herself. Sarah's world shattered on an ordinary Tuesday morning when she discovered her husband David's hidden phone while doing laundry. What started as a simple search for the device's owner quickly transformed into the most devastating discovery of her 7-year marriage: text messages between David and Amanda that revealed not just an affair, but a web of lies that would unravel everything Sarah thought she knew about her life. The messages painted a picture of intimate betrayal that cut deeper than physical infidelity. David hadn't just been cheating, he'd been living an entirely double life, sharing details about their marriage, their finances, and their most private moments with another woman. Amanda knew things about Sarah that only a husband should know, creating a grotesque intimacy triangle where Sarah was the unknowing third party in her own marriage. Initially paralyzed by shock and self-doubt, Sarah found herself questioning everything: her worth as a wife, her ability to recognize deception, even her own sanity. The man who brought her flowers and cooked dinner had been systematically betraying her while maintaining the facade of a loving, concerned husband. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. But Sarah's best friend Maya, a tough-as-nails private investigator, refused to let her wallow in self-blame. Maya's practical wisdom cut through Sarah's emotional fog. This wasn't about what Sarah had done wrong, but what David had chosen to do. Maya helped Sarah understand that she was dealing with a master manipulator who had weaponized her trust against her. The discovery of the affair was just the beginning. When Sarah hired powerhouse divorce attorney Rebecca Morrison, their investigation uncovered financial crimes that dwarfed the emotional betrayal. David hadn't just been hiding an affair, he'd been systematically stealing from their marriage for over a year. The forensic accounting revealed a sophisticated scheme of financial abuse. David had drained joint accounts, liquidated retirement funds, purchased cryptocurrency, opened offshore accounts, and even taken out a second mortgage on their house using forged documents. Most shocking was the discovery that he'd purchased an investment property in Amanda's name, essentially stealing from Sarah to build wealth for his future with his mistress.
The numbers were staggering. David had hidden or stolen nearly $500,000 in marital assets, while Sarah lived paycheck to paycheck, believing their financial struggles were real. He'd been playing the long game, planning his exit strategy for over 2 years while using their marriage as a stepping stone to build wealth and social connections. When Rebecca's legal team moved into action, David's carefully constructed world collapsed with devastating speed. His assets were frozen, criminal charges were filed for fraud and identity theft, and Amanda, faced with potential prison time, quickly flipped and testified against him, revealing the full scope of his manipulation. Amanda's testimony exposed David's psychological cruelty. He had created an entirely fictional narrative about his marriage, telling Amanda that Sarah was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and unable to have children due to fertility issues, lies designed to justify his behavior and cast himself as the victim of an impossible situation. The revelation was both devastating and liberating for Sarah. She realized that their marriage had been doomed from the beginning because David had never been fully invested in it. She couldn't have saved something that had never really existed. His betrayal wasn't about her failures as a wife, it was about his fundamental character and his view of relationships as transactional rather than based on genuine love and commitment. The legal resolution was swift and decisive. David pleaded guilty to fraud charges and received 2 years in federal prison, followed by probation and a decade of restitution payments. Sarah received full ownership of their house, substantial alimony, and punitive damages that ensured her financial security. More importantly, she received validation that her experience was real and that she deserved justice. The story fast-forwards 3 years to reveal Sarah's remarkable transformation. At 37, she had discovered who she really was when freed from the constraints of trying to be someone else's ideal partner.
She'd renovated her house to reflect her authentic taste, built a thriving graphic design business, learned new skills like rock climbing and pottery, and traveled solo to places she'd always wanted to see. The woman who had once defined herself through her relationship had become someone who knew her own worth. She'd learned to make coffee exactly how she liked it, painted her walls in bold colors that made her happy, and surrounded herself with art that told the story of her authentic interests and experiences. Sarah's healing journey wasn't just about recovering from betrayal, it was about discovering her true self. She realized she'd spent years adapting her preferences, interests, and even her personality to match what she thought David wanted. Freedom from that performance allowed her to explore who she really was and what she actually enjoyed. The story concludes with Sarah receiving a letter from David as his prison sentence neared its end, an attempt at apology and accountability that felt too little, too late. But by then, Sarah had moved so far beyond needing his validation or explanation that his words couldn't touch the peace she'd built for herself. This powerful story resonates because it illustrates the journey from devastating betrayal to authentic self-discovery. Sarah's experience shows that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for becoming who we were always meant to be. Her strength lies not in what she survived, but in how she chose to rebuild. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that you're stronger than you know, please subscribe for more tales of resilience, transformation, and the incredible power of choosing yourself. Every story we share is a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a path forward to something better.